Okay, we have one more part to your notes for day one, and that is how to estimate a square root. So that means figuring out what the square root is of a number without actually typing it into our calculator. Okay, so we're going to figure out between what two consecutive integers, consecutive meaning numbers next to each other, is the square root. And then we'll estimate it to the nearest tenth. So we're going to get right down to a decimal of what that square root is approximately. Okay, so first we have the square root of 74. Okay, that is not a perfect square, so we don't know this one just right off the top of our head. Okay, but we have our list of perfect squares that we can compare this to. Okay, so if we think back to our perfect squares that we have listed at the top of our paper, what we want to do is we want to figure out what perfect squares this square root is in between. So if I look at my perfect squares, I can see that the number right below it would be square root of 64. And the other perfect square that's on the other side of it would be square root of 81. Okay, so 64 and 81 would be the two perfect squares that 74 is in between those two numbers. Okay, why would I want to see what two perfect squares it's in between? Well, because I know the square root of those. I know the square root of 64. What times what is 64? Well, that is 8. Okay, and I know the square root of 81. What times what is 81? That would be 9. Okay, so therefore, if this square root of 64 is 8, square root of 81 is 9, that means the square root of 74 is between those two integers. Okay, somewhere between 8 to 9. Okay, the question is, how do I then get it to the nearest tenth? How do I figure out what that decimal is? Okay, that's where we want to see, well, which perfect square is it closest to? So we want to look at how far apart 74 is from each of these numbers. So the distance between 74 and 64, well, those two numbers are 10 apart from each other. Okay, these two numbers right here between 74 and 81, well, those are 7 apart from each other. Okay, so now looking at the distance between these, we can see that 74 is closer to 81 than it is to 64. That means it's in the upper half of these numbers. So between 8 and 9, we know 8.5 is the middle of 8 and 9, right? So if it's closer to this number than this number, that tells me it's somewhere between 8.5 and 9. Okay, it's between those two. Okay, so then how do I know exactly? Well, that's where we can kind of take our best guesstimate of the fact that those two numbers are very close to each other. That means, 10 and 7 are pretty close to each other. That means, yes, it's closer to this, but it's not all the way close to 9, meaning it's not like 8.9, and it's not 9. So it's probably in a little bit lower range of somewhere around maybe 8.6 or 8.7, since, again, these are pretty close to each other. Okay, so I'm going to say it's somewhere between 8.6 to 8.7. So you might be thinking, well, how did I know it was those two decimals? Okay, and I don't know for sure until I type that in my calculator. But here's another way we can look at this. We can look at these three numbers. We can envision where are they at on a number line. So I'm going to make a number line that goes all the way from 64 to 81 to help you out with that. Okay, so let's see. If I start with 64, okay, 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73, 74. Okay, so there's square root of 74. Or I'll just write the 74, I should say. Okay, and then we keep going up to 81. So 74, 75, 76, 77, 78, 79, 80, 81. Okay, now looking at these numbers, look at the spread. Okay, if the square root of 64 is 8, square root of 81 is 9, we know visually looking at this, we could count till we found the middle, which, let's see, what would the middle be? So there's 17 numbers apart from each other, so the middle would be, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, about 8.5. Okay, so this would be where 8.5 would be. So then we can see that 74, which I don't even know where, I think I have that right here. You can see how it's between these two numbers, but again, it's closer to the 8.6. So if I was just kind of thinking, or sorry, 8.5. So if I was just kind of thinking, if that's 8.5, this would be 8.6, 8.7, 8.8, 8.9, roughly in that spot. So that's why where this number is around 8.6 to 8.7. So then if I were to type that into my calculator, if I actually, instead of estimating, if I typed it in, second, the square root button of 74, we can see that the answer is actually 8.60, etc. So it is very close to 8.6. So this was a really good estimate. Okay? So again, using a number line helps you decide exactly that decimal. You don't have to do this every time. As long as you can kind of see that Okay, it's in between these two, and it's a little bit closer. 7 is a little bit closer than 10 away from this. That helps me know it's just a little bit bigger than 8.5. You can do that as well. All right, so let's see about the square root of 13. So if I look at my perfect squares, well, let's see. Square root of 16 would be just above it, which is 4, because 4 times 4 is 16, which means square root of 9 then is on the other side of it, which is 3. Okay, so again, going back to your list of perfect squares, 13 is between these two perfect squares. So I know square root of 13 is something between 3 to 4. All right, so then I look at how close it is. Well, I see square root of 13 is 3 away from this number, and square root of 13 is 4 away from this number. So we notice it's very close to the middle, right? 3 away versus 4 away. So that's very close to the middle, and the middle of from 3 to 4 would be 3.5. But it's just a hair closer to this, right? 3 away versus 4 away. So that's a pretty good indicator that's just a tiny bit bigger than this. It's in this range from 3.5 to 4, but it's just a tiny bit bigger, which would be about 3.6 would be the best estimate. Okay, and if you type in your calculator, you'll see that it is very close to that. All right, so one more, square root of 28. So if we go to our perfect squares, let's see, square root of 25 would be the number right below it. Square root of 25 is 5. And then the perfect square right above it would be 36. And the square root of 36 is 6. So we know 28 is somewhere between 5 to 6, right? So again, we look at how close is it to these numbers. Well, 25 is just 3 away from 28. And then over here it is, would that be 8 away? So this time, it's closer to this number than to this number. So if 5.5 is the middle of 5 and 6, it's closer to this one. We know it's in this range. It's somewhere between 5 and 5.5. Okay? And it is quite a bit closer to this one. So, and it's not very far away, so that means it's in those lower range of the 5s. So probably around 5.2 would be a really good guess of that. Okay? We could maybe also say 5.3 perhaps. Okay, so notice there will be a couple possible answers that you could say of where it is in your number line. So again, I can make a number line of this if I'm trying to figure out exactly where it would be. If this is 25, 26, 27, 28's right here, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36. Okay, we know that the square root of 25 is 5, square root of this one is 6. If I find the middle's right around here. This is where 5.5 would be. Okay, right somewhere in the middle. And we can see it's kind of in the middle of that. So yeah, 5.3 is probably your best guess when you're looking at that. But again, 5.2 would be okay as well. All right, so now that's the end of your day 1 note. So now you're going to do some practice of that.